All right, so you've probably heard the big story, right? The US and China are locked in this epic AI Cold War, a high stakes race to control the future. But what if they're not? In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on a twist that might just change how you see this whole thing.
Yeah, what if that whole AI Cold War narrative is, well, maybe not the full picture? What if the idea of a single winner, one country standing on top of the podium, what if that's just not how this is going to play out? That's the big question we're diving into today.
Okay, so to get to the bottom of that, let's first break down the story that's being told pretty much everywhere. You know the one, the AI Cold War. It's this narrative of a massive winner-take-all race for technological and geopolitical dominance. It's a really compelling story for sure, but is it the whole story?
So when people throw around this term AI Cold War, what do they actually mean? Well, forget the old school stuff like nuclear warheads or battles over communism versus capitalism. This new conflict is all about technology. The weapons are advanced semiconductors, these tiny little chips, and the soldiers are super smart algorithms. And the prize? It's huge. We're talking about who gets to call the shots both economically and militarily for decades to come.
And look, this whole narrative didn't just appear out of thin air. It's been building for a while now. You can really trace it back to 2017. That's when China basically put the world on notice with its AI development plan, saying, hey, we're aiming to be the global leader by 2030. Then in 2018, Wired magazine coins the term AI Cold War, and boom, the name sticks. Fast forward to 2022, and the US responds in a big way with the CHIPS Act, pumping a whopping $280 billion into its own tech sector. The race was officially on. So you might be thinking, is this all just a bunch of headlines and hype? Well, not quite. There's some pretty solid evidence backing up this intense competition narrative, and a lot of it comes from some very real, very serious concerns about national security and who's going to be in the driver's seat of the global economy. And then this report dropped. It was basically a bombshell. The final report from the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence, or NSCAI. And we're talking about a group of heavy hitters here, co-chaired by none other than former Google CEO Eric Schmidt. Their conclusion was a real wake-up call. AI isn't just about cool gadgets and a better search engine. It's a fundamental issue of national security. And this report, it did not pull any punches. I mean, it flat out warned that China is poised to jump in and take over where U.S. intellectual property protections are weak. The bottom line was that the U.S. could seriously lose its top spot in global tech leadership. The message was crystal clear. This is a real, legitimate threat, and the stakes are about as high as they get. So, naturally, the U.S. didn't just take that lying down. It went on the offensive. You see the CHIPS Act, right? That's $53 billion in subsidies just for semiconductor manufacturing. Then you have export controls stopping companies like ASML from selling their most advanced chip-making gear to China. There was the China Initiative to fight intellectual property theft, and a big push to build alliances with other democracies. Every single one of these actions is like a calculated move on a massive geopolitical chessboard. Okay, but remember that twist I mentioned at the beginning? Here's where things get really interesting. Because if you look past all the political posturing and the scary headlines, the actual data, especially from the world of scientific research, tells a completely different story. It's a story of collaboration. Which brings us right back to that big question. Is war really the right word to describe what's going on here? Because honestly, when you start to peel back all those layers of rhetoric, you find something that might genuinely surprise you. Down in the trenches of actual AI research, the line between our team and their team gets really blurry. Just take a look at this. This chart tells such a fascinating story. There was a study that looked at over 5 million AI papers, and the results were incredible. It found that when researchers from the US and China collaborate, the papers they produce are way more impactful, whether they're led by the US or by China. Papers without that collaboration, they just don't measure up. This isn't a zero-sum game where one side has to lose for the other to win. It's a total win-win. And we're not just talking about academic papers here. This goes deeper. There's this significant two-way flow of top-tier AI talent moving between the two countries. You've got these brilliant scientists who are part of a truly global community. They're all working together to push the frontiers of AI, and frankly, their passports don't seem to matter nearly as much as the problems they're trying to solve. Now check this out, because this chart really gets to the human story behind all the data. Get this, 98.8% of AI scientists who move from China to the US have Asian ancestry. But here's the kicker. 96% of the scientists moving from the US to China also have Asian ancestry. What that tells us is that there's this deeply connected transnational community of researchers that's really the engine of innovation on both sides of the ocean.
So how on earth do we make sense of this? On one hand, you've got this fierce government-level competition. On the other, you've got this incredibly productive scientific collaboration. Well, the answer seems to be that they're just playing two different games. They have fundamentally different strategies. It's like they're not even in the same race. They're running on two completely different tracks.
So what do these different strategies actually look like? Well, here's a way to think about it. The US strategy is like a massive capital investment play. It's about leveraging huge amounts of money to get to artificial general intelligence, or AGI first, with a big focus on proprietary closed-off models. China, on the other hand, is playing a game of efficiency and scale. They're focused on actually deploying and applying AI right now, and they're doing it by cleverly using open-source models that are available to everyone. And if you want to see just how different these investment strategies are, look no further than this number. Projections show that by 2027, the big US cloud companies are on track to spend $700 billion on data centers. Their Chinese counterparts? Just $35 billion. That is a 20-to-1 gap in spending. And yet, and this is the crazy part, their AI models are performing at a roughly similar level. It's wild. This whole situation perfectly captures a key point made by AI pioneer Yann LeCun. He basically argues that maybe we're all focused on the wrong competition. He says the real story isn't US versus China. It's proprietary, closed-off models versus open-source models. And as he puts it, open source is like a rising tide that lifts all boats. And that means it's lifting China's boats, too. So where does all this leave us? What does it mean for the future of AI? Well, it means the reality is just so much more complex, so much more messy and interconnected than that simple AI Cold War headline would have you believe. The big takeaway here is that this isn't an either-or situation. It's not competition or collaboration. It's a really complex dynamic of both things happening at the exact same time. It's a tangled relationship of rivalry and, weirdly enough, mutual dependence. And as you can imagine, this complexity makes creating good policy an absolute nightmare. The Council on Foreign Relations put it perfectly, calling the US AI chip export policy strategically incoherent. Why? Because it creates this, quote, false sense of security, while at the same time, it authorizes huge numbers of AI chip exports to China. It just goes to show how incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible it is to draw a clean line in the sand. Which leaves us with one last, kind of unsettling question to think about. In this global race for AI supremacy, is the biggest risk really falling behind? Or is the biggest risk the race itself? Something to chew on. Thanks for tuning in.